Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brittany of BrittanyJJones.com. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the channel. I hope that you will like what you see and subscribe below for more. In today's video, we are going to be sewing view C on my latest Know Me pattern. The number is Know Me ME2096. It's this really cute jumpsuit. Again, this is on my latest fall pattern. If you're looking for view A, I have the link to that video down in the description box for the turtleneck view on this pattern. Before we start sewing, I do want to point out that I highly recommend making a muslin of this jumpsuit before you start sewing, simply because if you are cutting one size on the bottom, you may not necessarily need that same size for the jumpsuit straps, like the top portion of the bodice. You may not need that size. I know I did not for myself, so I had to downsize it. And I just want you to be aware that just because you cut, the size 20 doesn't mean you need the 20 up here in your bust. If you do, awesome, but if not, just go ahead and make that muslin just so you know for sure. I also recommend making the muslin because you may have to shorten the overall pieces as well, the bodice pieces. They may need to be shortened. So please, please, please make a quick muslin to get the fit and the test right. I would hate for you to go through the full sewing process only to try it on and the bodice is too big. So please, 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 please make a muslin of the bodice portion just to make sure you have the right size. And if you need to shorten it, you can go ahead and make those adjustments before you finish making it. So with that being said, go ahead and cut out all your pieces, sew up a quick muslin, and let's get started sewing. Again, we're going to be sewing along to view C on Know Me ME2096. On the back of the pattern, there are some fabric suggestions if you are not sure what fabric would be great for this pattern. There are some suggestions along the back as well as the notions, and I do recommend cutting out the size based off of the finished garment measurement. Once you have everything cut out, let's get started. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to start working on our front pattern piece number 10. Make sure that you transferred your markings along the front. And as you can see, I went ahead and finished off my edges with my serger. This is optional, but I'm going to be pinning between the large circle and the notch. Go ahead and pin there, and we're going to stitch again between the notch and the large circle. Once you have it pinned, we're going to be stitching using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, I have mine stitched and this is what it looks like here. Next, we're going to start working on the zipper, and the first thing I'm going to do is turn in the right front opening edge along the fold line. So I place a little clip where my fold line is. If you didn't place a clip, that's totally fine. You can just find the fold line on your pattern piece and just press that raw edge in. As you can see, I've gone ahead and pressed it in, and so now I'm just going to slide my zipper right along that pressed edge. I'm going to match up the zipper stop with the small dot that we transferred, and I'm just going to start pinning the zipper in place. Again, I have the zipper teeth right beside that pressed edge. I'm going to continue pinning, and once it's all pinned, I'm going to put on my zipper foot, and I'll be basting this in place first. Let's go ahead and do that now. Now that we have it basted in place, your zipper should look something like this. Let's go ahead and grab pattern piece number 12. This is the right fly. You should have cut one of fabric and one of interfacing. Go ahead and fuse your interfacing onto it and transfer your markings. Then we're going to go ahead and fold it so the right sides are together. And along that lower edge, we are going to be stitching at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm going to place a few pins in mine, and let's go ahead and stitch it in place. Once you have it stitched, you can go ahead and trim down your seam like I'm doing here. We're going to flip it right side out. You can poke out that little corner if you'd like, and then go ahead and I'm going to serge my raw edges together along the other long side. As you can see, I have a little bit of a thread tail, so I'm going to be taking this knitting needle and I'm just going to thread the serger tail through that and just kind of feed it through the serger stitch to just kind of hide some of that stitching so it's not just loose in the pant. And so this is what it looks like after I've done that. And now I'm ready to go ahead and apply it onto the pants. And now that we have it finished, we can go ahead and pin it behind the right side of the zipper like so. So as you can see, I've just kind of slid it behind the zipper. And what I've done is on the inside, I am matching that up with that notch as well as the raw edge right over the zipper. I'm also matching up that small dot that we transferred at the bottom. And I am just going to start to pin that in place, and then we can baste it right along that same basting stitch. So again, make sure that you have it matched up along the inside, have those raw edges even, and have it over your zipper, and go ahead and pin that in place. Again, you can baste it in place, or if you like, you can go ahead and do your top stitching. It's totally up to you, but the top stitching is the next step. All right, if you did a basting stitch, you can go ahead now and do your top stitch once you like everything, and then go ahead and remove the basting stitches. This is what mine look like here. Next, we're going to go ahead and take the left fly facing. You should have cut one of fabric and one of interfacing. And as you can see, I've went ahead and finished off that long curved edge with my serger. So you go ahead and do yours the same. And with right sides facing, we're going to lay this down onto the left side and go ahead and pin that in place, and make sure that you match up that large circle that we transferred. And again, pin that in place. Once it's pinned, we can go ahead and stitch at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once it's stitched, yours should look like this. Now we can go ahead and trim. After we have it trimmed, then we'll go ahead and do some understitching. With understitching, you want to make sure that you have your seam allowance facing toward the fly facing, and then you want to stitch really close to that seam. Let's do the understitching now. Now that the understitching is done, we can give it a press and turn the fly to the inside, and everything should just start to really come together now. You should just be able to lay your left over your right, and you shouldn't have any kind of folds or pulls. If so, this is the time to make some adjustments. But now that it's folded over, I'm going to go ahead and baste that close. That's just going to help me know that everything is right where it needs to be, and everything is laying nice and flat along the outside. So I'm just basting it by hand. You can baste it by machine if you prefer. But again, go ahead and baste it close. That way, again, you already know that everything is laying how it needs to lay once we are done with the other remaining steps to installing the zipper. Now that it's basted, we can finish sewing the remaining zipper tape onto the facing. So along the inside, I'm going to pin the right facing out of the way. Make sure I don't pin that. And again, you just want to stitch the remaining zipper tape to the left fly facing. That is what we're going to be stitching now. So go ahead and pin the other facing out of the way, and then let's go ahead and pin the zipper tape onto the facing. And we're going to be stitching that down the center of the zipper tape and along the edge of the zipper tape. We're doing 2 stitches on that zipper tape to the facing. Let's stitch that in place now. Now that we have the remaining portion of the zipper stitched to the fly facing, next we can go ahead and do our top stitch on the left side of our pant. You can go ahead and transfer your stitching line. I'm just transferring mine here. I originally made this a little bit too wide, and so I did go back and unpick it and do my stitch again. But go ahead and transfer your line, and then you just want to do a top stitch over that. As you can see, I unpicked my line and I stitched it again. But again, go ahead and just transfer your line, do your stitching, and remove your basting stitch. Along the inside, we are going to tack the bottom edge of our right fly to our left fly facing. For some reason, I did not have I couldn't really grab them, as you can see my stitch there. So I just got a needle and thread, and I'm just tacking it kind of on the inside. I'm not going through the pants at all. I'm just trying to create a little hand tag here just to have those pieces together. So go ahead and secure your right fly to your left fly facing along the lower edge. And then you can add some bar tacks onto your stitching onto the right side if you prefer. It's totally optional, but if you want to, you can do that. Now let's go ahead and start to work on the back. And the first thing that we're going to do is to create our darts. So for your darts, you want to bring your dart legs together, and then we are going to pin through the dart legs. I always like to start on one side, make sure that I have the pin coming out the dart leg on the other side, and just pin the dart together. So go ahead and do that for both of your darts along the back, and then we can stitch it in place. We're going to back stitch at the widest point of the dart, and once we get to the end, we will tie a knot with the threads. So let's go ahead and sew both darts on our back pattern piece now. Now that we have both of the darts sewn, you want to press your darts going toward the center seam. And now we can start to work on the pocket. You should have cut out one pocket for this. If you'd like, you can add two if you want to cut out two pockets, but I only cut out one. What we're going to do is fold in 1/4 of an inch along the top edge of the pocket. So go ahead and fold that in and give it a press. And then you want to fold down along the fold line onto the right side of the pocket like so. We are going to stitch along the seam line a 5/8 of an inch all the way along the pocket. So start at the top and stitch down 5/8 of an inch all the way along the pocket. Let's go ahead and do that now. Once you have that stitch, it should look like this. And I am going to trim away all of the facing along the top and just trim away a little bit of the fabric like so. So I'm creating a little bit of an angle, as you can see. Once you have that trimmed, go ahead and flip your pocket right side out, poke out those corners, and then we can go ahead and give everything a press in the seam allowance. So while we did that stitch, and it makes it so easy for us now to go ahead and press everything in like so. When you press in your corners, you want to press in the corner first and then press in the side and lower edge of the pocket. So go to your pressing station and go ahead and press your pocket in all the way along the edges like so. Now that we have it pressed, we can base close to the inner pressed edge and then do a top stitch along that basting stitch, and then another stitch 1/4 of an inch away from that. Now that the top stitching is done along the top edge of the pocket like so, we can go ahead and pin it onto our back pant piece. So at our markings, you should have transferred 2 circles along the back. Find those markings and let's go ahead and pin it in place. Make sure that you have your top edges at those circles and pin along the outer edges of your pocket. Once you have your pocket pinned onto the back, we are going to be doing an edge stitch and a top stitch along the side and lower edges of the pocket. So again, go ahead and pin it in place and then do your edge stitch and your top stitch to secure your pocket in place. All right, now that you have your pocket on, now we can go ahead and stitch our inner leg seams together. So go ahead and put your fronts to your back, right sides facing, and pin your inner leg seams together. Go ahead and match up your notches, your raw edges, and go ahead and pin in place. As you can see, I did finish off my seam allowance. That's optional. You can do it before or after. I did mine before, but go ahead and pin both of your inner leg seams together like I've done here, and then we can stitch using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that we have our inner leg seams sewn, go ahead and give those seams a press. I've pressed mine open. Next, we want to go ahead and stitch the remaining of our center seam. So right where we stopped stitching at the beginning of our pant, We're going to start back there and just continue stitching the center seam, match up those inner leg seams that we just sewn, pin those in place, and then we will stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then we're going to stitch again between the notches a 1/4 of an inch in the seam allowance just to add a little bit of reinforcing and support to that center seam. So stitch at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance first, the whole seam, and then just between the notches, do another stitch at a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance just for some extra stability along that seam. Okay, I have my center seam sewn. This is what that looks like here. You can press your seam open as far as you can go as well. Next, we're going to start working on our pockets. So go ahead and grab your pocket pieces. This pattern has you cutting out 2 for a lining piece. So this is the one that I'm using for a lining. The lining fabric goes toward the front and the main fabric pocket piece goes toward the back. So let's go ahead and pin all of our pockets onto our sides. Again, make sure that you have the lining piece or the lining pocket going toward the front pattern piece, and then your main fabric goes toward the back. Go ahead and pin it in place, and we're going to stitch them all on using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. After you have them stitched, you can go ahead and finish off your raw edges. Let's go ahead and stitch all 4 of our pocket pieces on now. All right, now that we have the pocket sewn on, we can go ahead and press the seams toward the pockets. And now we can go ahead and stitch the front to the back together along the sides. So go ahead and lay your pieces right sides facing like so. So go ahead and lay your pieces right sides facing and begin pinning along your side seam. Make sure that you pin at your markings that you transferred. It's really important if your markings have disappeared, go ahead and transfer them back because we will start and stop stitching at those markings. So go ahead and transfer those and then pin along the entire side seam as well as around the pocket. Now that we have it all pinned, now we can go ahead and start stitching. We're going to begin at the top and then we're going to stop at the first dot, back stitch there, cut your thread, leave an opening for your pocket, start back stitching at that second circle, stitch to the remaining of the pin, and then stitch around the pocket. Let's go ahead and do that stitching now. Now that the pocket is stitched on, it should look like this, and we're going to clip our back seam allowance right below the pocket. The back seam allowance only. Once you have it clipped, we'll be able to open up that side seam and give it a press, and then you want to press your pocket going toward the front and do a basting stitch along the top so that the pocket stays going toward the front. This is what my pants looks like once I have done that clip and that basting stitch. Now let's start to work on the bodice. To begin working on the bodice, we're going to take pattern piece number 5 and 6. I'm going to start working with pattern piece number 5. And the first thing that we're going to do is go ahead and sew the dart that is on our lining as well as our main fabric piece. So let's go ahead and pin that out the same way that we did for the dart on our back pant. Go ahead and pin that out and then we can stitch it in place for both darts on the lining and the main fabric. Now that we have our darts sewn, you want to give them a press going toward the side, not toward the center. So press both of your darts going toward the side. And then we want to go ahead and press under our shoulder seam allowance. So as you can see here, I've gone ahead and pressed under 5/8 of an inch along the main fabric and the lining. I actually did a basting stitch right at 5/8 of an inch and then press that in. That's just a guideline because we will need to stitch that later, but you don't need to do the basting stitch. You just need to press that in because you don't want to accidentally sew that in the next upcoming steps. So with right sides facing, go ahead and lay your bodice pieces together, the main fabric and the lining like so. And we are going to stitch along the front edges, again, making sure that you stop right at that shoulder seam. Do not stitch all the way to the end. Let's go ahead and stitch at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that we have it stitched, let's go ahead and trim down our seam. And I'm not going to trim up there at the shoulder seam allowance that we pressed in, but let's go ahead and trim like I'm doing here. After we have it trimmed, then we can do understitching as far as we can go. And I'm also not going to be doing the understitching all the way up there at the shoulder seam. So I'm not really working at that piece just yet because we haven't stitched it, but just go ahead and do understitching along the portion that we stitched. Now that we have that understitched, the next thing for us to do is go ahead and pin the remaining portion of the bodice along the armhole seam. Go ahead and fold that right sides facing like so, pin that in place, and then we can stitch it the same exact way, trim it and understitch it. Now that we have the bodice stitched together, we can flip it right side out. We can give it a good press, and then we can baste the lower raw edges together. So again, once you have it stitched like so, go ahead and give it a press and baste the lower edges together. We are going to repeat those same exact steps that we just did to the back. The only difference is that the back piece does not have any darts. So go ahead and repeat those same steps that we did to the front, do those same steps to the back, and then we can move on to the next step. Okay, I have my front and my back stitched and prepped, as you can see here. The next thing for us to do is to put our main fabric pieces together, and we're going to be stitching that shoulder seam. So this may take a little bit of maneuvering to make sure that you keep the lining out of the way. And we only want to sew the two main fabric pieces together, match up those notches, and let's just go ahead and pin that shoulder seam at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. That's why I did that basting stitch. That way I have a guide. Again, it was totally optional, but it just helps. If you pressed it, you still kind of have that crease that you can follow for your 5/8 of an inch as well. But again, put your shoulder seams together, right sides facing, and let's go ahead and stitch it in place. Now that we have it stitched, you can go ahead and trim down your seam like I'm doing here. Go ahead and trim yours down. Again, only trimming the main fabric. Once you have that trimmed, now we can go ahead and fold in the lining and give that a press. But first, just make sure you have everything nice and smooth. Try to open up your seam if you can. Make sure everything is nice, smooth, and flat. Give it a press and then fold in your lining. Once you have that folded in, we're going to get a needle and thread and do some slip stitching. So you just want to slip stitch that open and close. Once you have done your slip stitch, it should look something like this. And you can do an optional top stitch along the side and front edges of your bodice pieces if you like. Once you have your bodice pieces sewn, let's go ahead and move on to the waistband. To begin working on our waistband, we're going to start working with our pieces that are interfaced. You should have interfaced pattern piece 7, 8, and 9. And as you can see here, I've gone ahead and stitched them along the side, matching up those notches, and just press my seam open flat. Next, we're going to take the interface pieces and match them up along our pants, matching up our side seams as well as our notches. And as you can see here, I am pinning the curved edge of the waistband onto the pant. So make sure that you're pinning the right side of the waistband onto the pant. And you should have some excess hanging off at the opening edges along the zipper. Let's go ahead and pin the waistband in place now. Once you have it pinned on, it should look something like this, and we can stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, now that we have our waistband sewn on, the first thing that I like to do before moving on to the next step is I highly recommend just zipping up your zipper to make sure that your waistband meets across the seam. You can do an awesome install for a zipper, but it can really go left at this step if you don't take time just to make sure that the waistband is even. So go ahead and zip it up and make sure everything is meeting nicely, and then go ahead and press your seam up and grab your bodice pieces. Next, we are going to pin on our bodice pieces and baste them in place. So go ahead and match up your notches, find your large and small dots, and just go ahead and pin your bodice fronts, matching up the fronts, pin it along the back as well, and then we can baste it all in place. Now that we have the bodice basted onto the waistband, now we can go ahead and grab our waistband pieces that are not interfaced. Those should look like this. You want to stitch them together the same exact way that we did the interfacing pieces. The only difference with this one is along the lower edge, we're going to fold up a 1/2 inch and press that in place. As you can see here, I've done that here. At first I stitched mine at a 1/2 inch. I just like getting that guideline and then pressing it. It's totally optional though, but just go ahead and press up a 1/2 inch along the lower edge of the uninterfaced waistband pieces like so, and then we can pin them on right sides facing. Once you have them pinned, let's go ahead and stitch in a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, I have my waistband facing sewn on. And right now, before I trim, I'm just kind of poking out the corners just a little bit. Again, I like to do the test before I start trimming away excess seam allowance, just in case I need to make some corrections. I always like to just see how everything is going to be meeting before I start trimming. But once you have it all stitched, go ahead and trim away your seam allowance. I also didn't say it, but you should have stitched the front opening of the waistband closed as well, like along the zipper. You should have been stitching that close, that excess fabric that we had remaining. Stitch that as well, and then trim down your seam and give everything a really good press like so. Once you have the press toward the inside, now we can go ahead and start pinning on the outside. We're going to pin, making sure that we catch that folded pressed edge on the inside because we're going to be doing a stitch in the ditch. So as you can see here, I'm placing my pins on the outside, making sure that I catch the pressed edge along the inside. Let's go ahead and do that around all of the waistband. And then once we have it pinned, we can go ahead and stitch in the ditch. All right, once you have it stitched, it should look similar to this. This is what mine's look like here along the inside. I just want to give you a close-up because I know this can be a tricky stitch. I don't always get it even along the inside. It's definitely something I have to keep working at, but this is what it looks like in this project. Now let's move on to the next step. Go ahead and clean up any loose threads if you have them. The next thing we're going to do is do top stitching all the way along the front and the sides of the waistband. So this is what that looks like with my top stitching applied along the front and the sides of the waistband. Once you have that done, the last few steps is for us to apply our buttonhole and our button. So go ahead and apply your buttonhole to the left waistband and your button to the right of the waistband. This is what mine looks like here that I have it all applied. And our last step is to do our hem. You can fold up a 1/4 of an inch and give that a press and then fold up an inch. Press that and then do your hem, or you can just finish off your raw edge and then fold up 1.25 inches and stitch your hem. The hem allowance is 1.25 inches. So again, you have two options on how you can finish that off. I'm just going to serge my raw edge and then fold up 1.25 inches and then stitch my hem in place. Once you have your hem sewn, you are all done with view C on my pattern ME2096. Well, that is all for the video, and I really do hope that you all enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them down for me below. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on your notifications so you do not miss when the next video is live, and I will see you all then. Blessings, everyone. Bye.